I have never cared much for the noise of Nairobi's morning traffic. My life moves too fast for that. When you've built an empire from the ground up, the city bends around you, not the other way around. Yet on that Thursday morning, as my driver navigated the Range Rover autobiography through the chaotic rush at Westlands, I found myself irritated by everything: horns blaring, street vendors knocking on windows, and especially that pedestrian walkway beside Sarit Center where the crowds flowed like a river with no discipline. People moved too slowly. They always did. "Sir, we may delay 10 minutes, my driver said. "The road is blocked near Ring Road." I sighed heavily. "James, everything in this city delays. That's why I prefer flying out." He chuckled politely. He always did. Everyone around me had learned to laugh when I complained, even when the complaint was unnecessary. That is what money does. It turns your irritation into something people pretend is wisdom. My name is Baraka Muture, 41 years old, founder of Muture Holdings, with investments in automotive imports, real estate, and logistics. My life is structured, precise, and disciplined. Nothing unsettles me, at least that is what I always believed. Until that day. The moment that would change everything happened in a place I passed every week. A simple parking lot behind a fuel station on Wayaki Way. I had no reason to stop there, but I had scheduled a meeting with a young mechanic who claimed to have sourced rare German gearboxes I needed for a new fleet of luxury cars. I believed he was exaggerating, of course. Everyone exaggerates around me. As we turned in, the chaotic world outside shrank. The air felt quieter, the polished gravel of the lot almost peaceful. But then I saw her. A woman stood next to a faded silver Toyota Probox, one of those worn-out, stubborn cars that looked like they had been dragged through the harshest parts of Nairobi life. The hood was open and steam spilled out like a small ghost escaping. She held a small boy by the hand, perhaps 6 years old, and another bag slung over her shoulder. She looked exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion rich people understand, but the deep kind that lives in someone who has been fighting life without rest. Her dress was simple, navy blue with faint patterns. Her hair was tied back neatly, though the day's heat had loosened a few strands along her forehead. She wasn't beautiful in the loud, attention-seeking way Nairobi socialites are. Her beauty was subtle, quiet dignity mixed with the fatigue of someone who could not afford a single bad day. She waved at a mechanic nearby. "Please, can you just check it again?" she pleaded. "It shut down in the middle of the road. My son needs to get to school." The mechanic shrugged. "Mama, I told you, engine inertia. You need a new car or a new engine. That one cannot help you anymore." Her lips trembled slightly, though she kept her voice steady. "I don't have money for a new car. Can you try again? Maybe if we cool it." The boy tugged her arm gently. "Mum, are we going to be late again?" She opened her mouth, closed it, swallowed hard. Something about the scene irritated me. Maybe it was the Probox blocking part of the lot. Maybe it was the delay. Maybe it was how freely people displayed their problems in public. I had no patience for it. "Why is that scrap blocking the way?" I muttered. James slowed the car. "Sir, should I reverse?" "No. Stop here." The driver parked beside her crippled vehicle. I stepped out, wearing my tailored Italian suit, leather shoes that never touched dust, and sunglasses that cost more than her entire car. She looked up as I approached, startled, then respectful. I was used to that look. People recognized power even when they didn't know your name. "Excuse me," she said softly, pulling her son closer to her side. "We will move shortly. I'm just waiting for him to check again." "It's not moving," I said bluntly. "That thing is dead." Her eyes widened, a mixture of embarrassment and hurt. I know it's old, but I'm trying." Trying. The word irritated me even more. "Some things are beyond trying," I said, gesturing at the hood. "That car belongs in a scrapyard." She blinked fast. "It's all I have," she whispered. Something cold and arrogant rose inside me, the version of myself I had spent years feeding. I looked at her again, at her shaky posture, at the tired boy with patched shoes, and instead of compassion, I felt dominance. I felt the need to remind her, anyone, that life rewards strength and punishes weakness. "You know," I said, smirking, "if you want to drive a proper car you need ambition. Not pity." Her jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, life is not the same for everyone." "And yet," I said, shrugging, "everyone wants the same comfort." I felt James shift uncomfortably behind me, but I didn't care. "Tell you what," I continued, my voice loud enough for the mechanic to hear. "You see this Range Rover?" I tapped the bonnet proudly. "If you can drive it around this lot without stalling, it's yours." Her mouth fell open slightly. "What?" If you can drive it even once, I said, I'll hand you the keys today. The mechanic chuckled under his breath. The woman blinked in confusion, then suspicion. Why would you say something like that? I smiled thinly. Because life doesn't hand out miracles. And you look like someone who still believes in them. Her son looked at the SUV with shining eyes. Mum, can you try? She looked down at him, then back at me. Her voice was barely audible. Sir, I don't think this is a joke I want to be part of. It's not a joke, I said. You say all you need is an opportunity. Here it is. Take it or step aside so real drivers can move. James whispered urgently, Sir, maybe we should just leave. I silenced him with a slight glare. The woman swallowed hard. She placed a protective hand on her child's shoulder. I don't know how to drive those kinds of cars. I've never even sat in one. Exactly, I said coldly. And that is why this conversation ends here. I turned to walk away, fully convinced she would step aside, gather her failing belongings, and quietly fade out of my morning like every other struggling person did. But then her voice stopped me. Wait. I turned back slowly. She looked terrified, yet something deep inside her had lit up. A spark of defiance. A spark I hadn't expected from someone in her situation. I will try, she said, lifting her chin. You said drive it once around the lot. I will try. James inhaled sharply. Madam, please, this is not safe. I said I'll do it, she repeated, her voice steadier now. I felt amused. Entertained even. Fine, I said. If you want to embarrass yourself, go ahead. She stepped forward, but not before lowering herself to her son's eye level. Stay here, she whispered gently. I'll be right back. The boy nodded anxiously. As she approached the Range Rover, her hands trembled. I tossed the keys toward her, expecting her to fumble them. But she caught them firmly. She opened the door slowly, reverently, like someone touching something sacred. She slid in. The seat swallowed her small frame. Then something happened that made me pause. She exhaled. Long, deep, and steady. As if she was releasing years of fear in one breath. She touched the steering wheel lightly, then securely. For a moment she looked transformed. I brushed the feeling aside. James, stand near the front. And make sure she doesn't crash into anything. He nodded nervously. The mechanic folded his arms, amused. The woman turned the ignition. The engine roared to life. She startled but didn't panic. Put it in drive, James instructed carefully. Slowly. She nodded. The car shifted. Moved. Steadily. I blinked. She guided the SUV forward with surprising control, though she was clearly nervous. The massive machine obeyed her gentle hands. She navigated it around the first curve, shakily but successfully. People nearby stopped to watch. She approached the second turn carefully and made it. My amusement began to fade. A flicker of uncertainty crept in. On the final stretch, she straightened the wheel, exhaled again, and brought the car to a smooth stop exactly where she had started. She turned off the engine and stepped out. Her hands were still trembling, but there was something powerful in her eyes now. She looked at me directly. I drove it, she said. A silence spread through the parking lot. James looked at me horrified. The mechanic's mouth hung open. The boy bounced excitedly. Mum, you did it. She held out the keys. You said if I drove it, it's mine. She didn't smile. She wasn't arrogant. She wasn't begging. She simply stood there, steady, honest, dignified, waiting for me to honor my ridiculous words. My mouth went dry. This was not how the morning was supposed to go. This was not how my life was supposed to go. For the first time in many years, I felt something unfamiliar tightening in my chest. Regret. Deep, immediate, uncomfortable regret. And that, though I didn't know it yet, was the beginning of my undoing. I have negotiated million-dollar contracts with foreign investors who spoke in riddles. I have stared down hostile board members and auditors who thought they could intimidate me. I have walked into banks and walked out with approvals no one else could get. In my world, words were weapons, bendable, adjustable, and always under my control. But that morning, standing in a dusty parking lot behind a fuel station, staring at Amina and George with her calm, steady eyes, I felt something unfamiliar. Cornered. She held out the keys without trembling now, her worn dress fluttering lightly in the breeze. Her son stood behind her with wide, hopeful eyes. Even the mechanic had paused, wiping his hands on his oily rag as if he didn't want to miss a single second of whatever was coming next. Sir, she said, voice soft but unshaken, you gave your word. Her tone wasn't defiant. She wasn't trying to embarrass me. That somehow made it worse. A quiet person standing in truth is far more difficult to dismiss than someone shouting. I forced a chuckle. Madam, that was obviously a joke. A joke. Her brow creased slightly. You spoke loudly. You pointed to the car. You said if I drove it without stalling, it was mine. That wasn't a contract, I said flatly. The mechanic muttered under his breath, but boss, we all heard. I shot him a sharp look. He instantly found something else to stare at. Amina didn't move. She didn't plead. She simply stood there with that annoying, gentle steadiness that made me feel like a schoolboy caught lying. Please take your keys, she repeated, extending her hand calmly. I didn't take them. James stepped closer, whispering urgently, Sir, you should just end this quickly. The crowd is looking. Indeed, several people had begun to gather near the edge of the lot. Boda riders, a few pedestrians, fuel station attendants. Nairobi is a city that loves drama, especially when it involves someone like me. I straightened, adjusting my cufflinks. Madam, you cannot expect me to hand over a vehicle worth 20 million shillings because you took a joke literally. She blinked once. I didn't expect you to offer it. The simplicity of the statement sliced right through my defenses. I only expected you to mean what you said, she continued quietly. That is all any decent person expects. Her son tugged her dress lightly. Mum, is he giving it? Hush, she whispered to him without looking away from me. Let the man decide. The man. Not sir. Not boss. That stung more than I cared to admit. I stiffened my shoulders. Look, this is unnecessary. I was merely showing off, she asked, head slightly tilted. Testing the poor woman? Making a point? Her voice wasn't sarcastic. She was genuinely asking. And that made my chest tighten. I don't have time for this, I snapped. Return the keys. She didn't move her hand. Sir, I drove it. In front of you. In front of witnesses. You made a promise. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Do you know who I am? She held my gaze. Should that change whether you keep your word? James inhaled sharply. The mechanic's eyebrows rose. A few people murmured. I felt heat flush up my neck, humiliation, anger, a sense of losing control. I was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone dressed in second-hand clothes with a car that was barely breathing. I reached for the keys. But she didn't let go. Not forcefully, just firmly enough that my fingers stopped mid-movement. Sir, she said softly, my son sees everything I do. If I teach him to accept injustice quietly, what kind of man will he become? Her words hit me harder than I expected. Something in her voice held the weight of 1,000 battles fought quietly. I hated that it affected me. I offered a joke, I muttered. You're twisting it. She shook her head gently. No. You're running from it. Those calm eyes. That steady tone. It dismantled every argument I tried to build. This wasn't a woman trying to trap me. This was a mother refusing to let her child believe promises mean nothing. But I couldn't give her the car. The idea was ridiculous. Absurd. I had insurance, company reputation, social circles, and pride to think about. Nairobi's wealthy elite would mock me for months, no years, if they heard I handed over a luxury SUV because I lost a bet to a struggling single mother. So I stepped back. James, start the engine. We're leaving. But James didn't move. Sir, he whispered, maybe this is not the right way to. Are you refusing orders now? I barked. He lowered his eyes. No, sir. Amina slowly lowered her hand, the keys still in it, and placed her other hand on her son's shoulder. I understand, she said. She didn't sound defeated. Or angry. Or desperate. She simply sounded tired. This happens often, she continued softly. People say things they don't mean. They make promises they never intended to keep. It's not new. Her son looked up at her anxiously. Mum, are we still walking? She stroked his head gently. Yes, we will walk. We always walk. Something twisted inside me, sharply, unexpectedly. Guilt. Shame. Something close to fear. She turned toward her dead pro box. Wait, I heard myself say. She stopped. The crowd quieted. Even the air felt still. She didn't turn around right away. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, then faced me again. Yes. I swallowed. My throat felt dry. You drove it impressively. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Thank you. I just meant, I cleared my throat, suddenly unsure of my own voice. Not many first-timers can manage that car. I wasn't trying to impress you, she said gently. Just trying to prove you wrong. The honesty burned. I shifted my weight. Let me offer something else. Her expression didn't change. Like what? I had no idea. Why had I even said that? My mind scrambled. Perhaps, compensation. Something useful. Not, the car. She stared at me for a long moment. The crowd leaned in. Her voice remained calm. What would you offer? Money, I blurted. Enough to fix your car. Her son's face brightened. Really? But Amina placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. How much? She asked. I waved dismissively. Whatever the repair costs. The mechanic said the engine is gone. I'll replace it. She shook her head instantly. No. No. No, she repeated, voice still soft but resolute. I don't want patches. And I don't want charity. I only wanted you to keep your word. It was a joke, I insisted weakly. A poor one, she replied. The mechanic whistled quietly under his breath. I glared at him. He looked at the sky. Amina's expression softened, not out of pity, but out of a clarity I did not possess. You know, she said quietly, I didn't expect the car. Truly. But when I saw you stand by your words, I thought, to myself and to him, maybe the world had more honest people than I believed. That struck me sharply. Too sharply. I said nothing. She offered the keys again. This is yours, she said. I'm not forcing you. I'm just holding you to the standard you set. Her grace unsettled me. It would have been easier if she shouted, accused me, caused a scene. I could have dismissed that. But this quiet strength, it was disarming. I stepped back from the keys. I can't, I said quietly. I see, she replied. She finally let her hand drop, her son leaning into her side. Come, she told him gently. We'll go. They turned toward the probox, but the mechanic rushed forward. Mama, that one cannot even start. You will walk far. She nodded. We are used to it. And they began walking, past the fuel pumps, past the shade of the station, toward the long stretch of Wayaki Way under the blazing sun. The crowd watched them go. James looked at me, disappointment etched clearly on his face. The mechanic muttered, boss, that was cold. But their words didn't matter. Because deep inside me, something had begun to unravel. Something I could not stop. Something that would change everything. The drive back to my office at Riverside Drive was the quietest I had ever experienced. Normally, James would update me on traffic, comment on construction projects along the road, or share some mildly entertaining observation about Nairobi life. I rarely paid him attention, but I had grown used to his soft background chatter the same way one grows used to the hum of an air conditioner. But that morning, nothing. He drove silently, his eyes fixed on the road, his jaw tight, his knuckles firm on the steering wheel. I stared at the passing city, Sarit on the left, the new towers rising near Westlands, the flow of endless pedestrians, but none of it anchored me. The silence inside the car was louder than anything outside. Finally I said, You're unusually quiet. I'm driving, sir, he replied. I didn't ask what you're doing. I said you're quiet. He hesitated. Yes, sir. That was all. I turned to look at him more carefully. James had worked for me for 8 years. He was loyal, disciplined, and respectful to a fault. I had never seen him look so stiff. You have something to say, I said. It wasn't a question. He inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly, almost painfully. Sir, with respect. I don't want to be rude. You won't be, I said sharply. Speak. More silence. Then, at a red light near Museum Hill, he finally said the words slowly, carefully. Sir, what you did back there was not right. The muscles in my shoulders stiffened. Watch your tone. I am watching it, he said, still calm. But I cannot keep quiet. The light turned green. He eased the car forward smoothly as always. Explain yourself, I said coldly. He swallowed. Amina. That woman. She didn't ask you for anything. She didn't beg. She didn't bother you. You approached her. I didn't approach her, she was blocking the path. Even if she was, he said softly, you humiliated her. The word stung. Humiliated. Women in my social circles would never dare say such a thing to me. My business partners? Impossible. Even my board members chose their words like surgeons. But James said it plainly. I shifted in my seat. She took a joke too seriously. He shook his head. No, sir. She took your words seriously. Those are not the same thing. I looked out the window, jaw clenched. Traffic crawled past the footbridge leading toward Uhuru Highway. People were walking, laughing, hustling, arguing, Nairobi life swirling around me like a world I no longer understood. You think I should just hand over a 20 million shilling car to a stranger? I muttered. No, sir. I think you should not have made the offer in the first place. My chest tightened. He continued, his voice steady, respectful, but unyielding. You embarrassed her in front of her child. And when she surprised you, when she showed courage, you punished her for it. I looked at him sharply. Punished? Yes, he said. She did what you challenged her to do. And instead of honoring that, you made her walk. In this heat. With a child. People walk every day, I snapped. Not after being mocked and misled, he replied gently. His calmness irritated me. It made it difficult to dismiss him as dramatic or emotional. He wasn't angry, just truthful. James, I said, rubbing my forehead, you're overreacting. I am not, he said quietly. The car entered Riverside Drive. My office building stood ahead, glass, steel, expensive landscaping. My empire. My world. But for the first time it felt hollow. He parked at the entrance, stepped out quickly, and opened my door as he always did. But his eyes refused to meet mine. Sir, he said, I have worked for you many years. You are a tough man. A demanding man. But never have I seen you do anything like that. I stiffened. He finally held my gaze. You always say your word is your bond, he continued. I have heard you say it to businessmen from Dubai, to partners from Johannesburg, to politicians in Nairobi. And you keep it. Always. He paused. Why was that woman not worthy of the same honor? His question hit me like a punch to the gut. I stepped out of the SUV, straightened my suit, adjusted my sunglasses, masking the sudden swirl inside my chest. James, I said, be careful. With respect, he replied, I am being careful. That is why I am saying this right away, not behind your back. He stepped aside. Have a good day, sir. But the tone in his voice said the opposite. I walked into the office building, greeted by cool air conditioning, the scent of polished wood, and the silent nods of reception staff. Everything was pristine, familiar, controlled. Yet something in me felt unsettled. Deeply unsettled. In my office on the 12th floor, I tried burying myself in work. I went through emails, reviewed investment proposals, signed off on vehicle shipment clearances. My staff came in and out with folders, updates, signatures, my usual rhythm. But nothing synced. Every document blurred. Every voice annoyed me. Every decision felt meaningless. At noon, my operations manager entered with a smile. Sir, the German suppliers confirmed they can ship. Fine, I said curtly. Leave it. He blinked. Don't you want to? I said leave it. He retreated quickly. My temper had rarely flared without reason, but that day I was a volcano plugged at the top, pressure building with no release. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the city skyline. Nairobi stretched endlessly, hills, highways, rooftops, all bathed in hazy noon sunlight. Yet all I saw was Amina walking away. Her hand on her son's shoulder. Her calm voice. Her dignity. Why hadn't she fought more aggressively? Why hadn't she shouted, demanded, cried, made a scene? That would have made it easier to dismiss her. But she had done the exact opposite. She held me accountable without raising her voice. And that was the most powerful confrontation of all. A knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Come in, I said. James entered. My brows rose. Why are you here? He looked nervous but resolved. Sir, I need to say one more thing. I exhaled heavily. James? You are a good man, he said quickly. I have seen it. There are things you do privately for people, staff, families, charities, that no one talks about. I know your heart is not cold. The word surprised me, and softened something inside my chest. He continued, but pride made you cruel today. The kind of cruelty wealthy men sometimes don't see because they are too high up. I stared at him, absorbing the words like bitter medicine. Sir, he said gently, if you keep walking like nothing happened, you will become a man you don't want to be. I rubbed my temples. What do you want me to do, James? Chase her down? Hand her the keys now. The moment is gone. Then find her, he said simply, and fix what you broke. That's impossible, I muttered. I don't know anything about her. He nodded slowly. Then maybe that is the first thing you should change. He placed the Range Rover keys on my desk. Sir, he said quietly, if a promise is too expensive to keep, it should never be made. But once made, a man is tied to it. He stepped back. If you can live with how today ended, then do nothing. He turned to leave. But if you can't, he paused at the door, then be the man many of us believe you are. And he walked out. leaving me with the silence, the heavy truth, and the first crack in my armor. The first crack in a wall I had built for decades. The wall that would soon crumble. The office felt like a gilded cage that day. The sun outside seemed too bright, too honest, illuminating every imperfection I had tried to ignore for years. I stared at the skyline of Nairobi, at the hills that cut the city into fragments, at the streets buzzing with the relentless pulse of life, and yet all I could see was her, Amina and George, walking away from me as if the world had not granted her permission to rise. James' words still echoed in my mind. If a promise is too expensive to keep, it should never be made. But once made, a man is tied to it. Tied to it. It was not just the car. It was the principle. The humiliation. The reminder that for all my wealth, for all my power, I had crossed a line. I had always believed money was authority. That influence was respect. That fear would enforce obedience. But Amina, quiet, steady, unshakable, had exposed a weakness in me that no contract, no office, no Range Rover could shield. I was unsettled. Disturbed. Angry at myself, yes, but also, strangely, excited. The thought of finding her, apologizing, perhaps even restoring what I had so thoughtlessly tried to deny her, gnawed at me. I didn't know why. Perhaps it was her dignity. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself in front of her son. Perhaps it was the fact that for the first time, someone had made me feel accountable. I picked up my phone and scrolled through contacts. Names blurred together, lawyers, investors, suppliers, friends. None of them mattered. None of them could lead me to her. And that made my next move both urgent and complicated. I called James. "Yes, sir," he answered. "Can you track her?" I asked bluntly. There was a pause. Yes, sir. But she isn't someone I know personally. She's a single mother. No public record that I am aware of. I don't care. Try everything. Her work, her child's school, friends, family. Find her. "Yes, sir," he said. The tone was calm, but I detected hesitation. "James," I added, "discretion. I don't want anyone gossiping about this." "Understood." The line went dead. I sat back, hands clenched over my leather chair's armrests. Discretion. Respect. Humility. Words that had always been abstract in my life suddenly seemed necessary, urgent, unavoidable. Hours passed. My meetings were half attended, my calls distractedly answered. Each time my phone buzzed, my heart raced, thinking it might be a lead. But no name came up, no clue, no hint of her presence in the sprawling city. By late afternoon, my mind had wandered to the boy. The small, hopeful eyes that looked up at his mother. I had almost ignored him in my rush to assert dominance. I had almost humiliated not just her, but a child who trusted the world enough to watch his mother stand with courage. I cursed myself quietly. I stood, walking to the window, and looked down at the streets. Nairobi stretched endlessly, but the city had never felt more alien to me. I had wealth, cars, influence, buildings, contracts, and power, but none of it mattered at that moment. All I wanted was to see her again, to make it right, to restore the dignity I had attempted to rob her of. James knocked lightly and entered my office. "Sir?" "Yes." I turned to him, pacing. "Any luck?" He shook his head. "Nothing concrete, sir. But I have a few leads. I can ask around her neighborhood, colleagues at work. He paused, taking a breath. "I wanted to warn you, sir. If you push too hard, if you come across as relentless, it could backfire. She is a proud woman." I frowned. "Pride?" "James," she walked away from me. "After what I did, she should be grateful I even looked her way." He met my eyes. "Sir, that is exactly why you are wrong. She isn't a charity case. She doesn't need your pity. She needs respect. And if you think you can force her to accept your apology or worse, the car, without proving you understand that, you will only humiliate yourself." I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. James was right. Of course he was right. But what did that even mean? How could I, someone accustomed to getting results instantly, navigate something so fragile, so human? I had been the master of transactions, negotiations, and ultimatums for years. Yet here, confronted with something entirely non-financial, morality, integrity, honor, I felt exposed, vulnerable, incapable. "I don't know how to approach her," I admitted quietly. "You'll figure it out," James said. "Start small. Show her you understand. Show her you mean what you said. And sir," he paused, "don't expect her to take it immediately. That is not your right. That is earned." I nodded slowly. The advice sounded simple, but the execution would require humility I had never practiced and patience I had never had. The evening air was warm as I finally stepped out of the office, the city lights beginning to glitter across the Nairobi skyline. I walked slowly toward my car, mind spinning. A plan began to take shape. Not a plan of power or influence or money, but a plan of approach, a way to make amends without arrogance, without coercion, without pride. I would have to find her. I would have to acknowledge my mistake. I would have to offer the keys again, but not as a reward for fear or compliance, but as a gesture of accountability. And I would have to accept the possibility she might refuse. The thought made me uneasy. For the first time in years I felt uncertainty. And yet, strangely, it felt right. When I arrived home, the mansion felt emptier than ever. The halls echoed with silence. The furniture gleamed under spotlights, the chandeliers glinted, and the security guards bowed respectfully as I passed. Yet the opulence around me felt hollow. Nothing here mattered. Nothing could matter until I set this right. I opened the Range Rover keys on my desk, rolling them over in my fingers. Gold, chrome, perfection, and yet they were not mine to decide upon. They belonged, in principle, to Amina and George. Not because of charity. Not because of pity. Because I had promised. And a man, a real man, honors his word. I sank into the leather chair, staring at the keys, thinking of her calm face, her steady posture, the way she had held her son with dignity. And I realized, with a sharpness I could not ignore, that my entire perspective of power, authority, and respect had been incomplete. I had assumed fear could enforce compliance. I had assumed money could buy dignity. I had assumed pride could substitute for conscience. Amina and George, with nothing but honesty and courage, had proven me wrong. And that truth burned. James' words returned to me. If you push too hard, it could backfire. Pride, it could backfire. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about accountability. I would have to find her. I would have to act. I would have to be a man worthy of the respect I had demanded from others all my life. And that would not be easy. Because for the first time the game was not about money. It was about heart. The next morning the city of Nairobi greeted me with the same relentless energy, but I moved through it differently. Usually I felt untouchable, every honking horn, every pedestrian's shout, every swerving matatu a background to my dominion. Now, however, every detail demanded attention. Every face reminded me of Amina and her son. I started with my driver, James. He had promised discreet inquiries and I knew he would act with care. But even the idea of waiting for reports tested my patience. For the first time I didn't feel in control. "James," I said as he pulled up outside the office, "have you located her?" "Not yet, sir. But I have leads. Some of her neighbors remember the Pro Box. There's a small shop near Parkland she frequents. I can start there." "Good. Go there now." He hesitated. "Sir, are you certain you want to confront her personally?" I nodded firmly. "Yes. I cannot send anyone else. This is my mistake. I must face it myself." His expression softened. "Understood, sir. I'll make sure she's approached respectfully." I followed him silently as we navigated through the crowded streets, weaving past bodas, hawkers, and throngs of city dwellers. I had driven these roads hundreds of times, yet today they seemed unfamiliar. Every honking car, every vendor shouting prices, every child running alongside a sidewalk was a reminder that life moved on, gritty, real, unforgiving. And yet I had nearly crushed someone living in it. We arrived at a small cluster of shops tucked between concrete buildings. It was not a place where luxury cars parked, nor where billionaires made decisions. It was raw, lived-in, ordinary. And yet it was exactly where I needed to be. "Stay in the car, sir," James instructed quietly. "I'll ask around first." I nodded reluctantly. Even in the moment I felt a strange relief. Someone else taking the first step was easier than plunging straight into confrontation. James moved from shop to shop, discreetly asking about a woman matching Amina's description. The locals responded cautiously, some with curiosity, some with skepticism, but eventually, a thin man in a faded orange apron nodded. "Yes," he said. "I've seen her. She comes by every morning to buy bread and milk. Takes her son along." James returned to the car. "Sir, she's likely here this morning. She's predictable." Predictable. That word made my chest tighten. I felt a knot of anticipation, fear, guilt, pride, and something I couldn't name. "Show me," I said. He led me to the street corner and there she was. Amina and George, carrying a small shopping bag, guiding her son by the hand. She had the same calm composure as the day we met, but now there was a softness in her eyes, a quiet world weariness that made my guilt twist deeper. I stepped out of the car. The heat of the Nairobi sun hit me, but I barely noticed. All I saw was her, the woman who had shamed me silently in the parking lot, who had forced me to face the hollowness of my arrogance. She looked up, startled, then cautious. "Sir," she said politely, "can I help you?" I swallowed hard. My tongue felt thick in my mouth. Words that had always come easily now seemed fragile, insufficient. "Amina," I began, voice rough. She tilted her head slightly, calm but wary. "I was wrong," I continued. "About the car, about what I said, about how I treated you." She waited, silent. Her son clung to her hand but watched me curiously. "I treated you with arrogance and cruelty. And I realize now that wealth does not give me the right to belittle someone else's struggle." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She remained calm. Quietly she measured me. Not with anger, not with drama, but with the steady, unwavering strength that had undone me before. "I see," she said softly. "Not thank you, not it's okay, just that small acknowledgement." I swallowed again. "I want to make it right. I promised you the car. And I don't want charity," she interrupted gently. The words cut deeper than her earlier calm challenge. I had assumed she would want the keys. I had imagined her accepting my apology in some form of relief or gratitude. Instead, she reminded me that she had dignity, that she had self-respect, and that I had violated it. "You're right," I said quietly. "It is not charity. It's accountability. And that is mine to uphold." Her son tugged at her skirt. "Mum, why is he here?" She looked down at him, then back at me. "He asked me to be polite," she said softly. I felt my chest tighten. A child, barely 6, teaching me morality. It was humiliating but also necessary. "I don't know if you'll accept this," I said, lowering my gaze, "but the keys are yours. As I promised. I understand if you refuse them." I extended the keys in my hand. My suit felt heavy, my wealth meaningless, every possession a weight compared to this moment. Amina looked at them. Then at me. Then at her son. She did not speak for a long moment. Finally, she stepped forward and took them, not with eagerness, not with relief, not with gratitude, but with calm dignity. "I accept," she said softly. I exhaled in relief, but the relief was complicated. This wasn't victory. This wasn't power. This was acknowledgement. A concession of my arrogance and a small step toward humility. Her son's face lit up with joy. "Mum," he exclaimed. She smiled faintly, turning toward him, and I felt something I hadn't in years, a pang of genuine, unselfish emotion. I realized then that this was not about money or cars or status. This was about respect. About honor. About being a man who could admit wrongdoing and take action to repair it. "Thank you," I said quietly. She nodded. "You're welcome," she said, voice calm. We stood there in the mid-morning sun. Traffic passed by, vendors called out prices, children ran along the sidewalks. Nairobi was alive, relentless, indifferent. And yet, in that small corner of the city, I had learned something invaluable. Humility is earned, respect cannot be purchased, and dignity is the strongest power of all. James appeared silently at my side, nodding. He didn't speak, but the look in his eyes said everything. "You've taken the first step, sir," he said quietly. I nodded. I had. But I also knew the path ahead would be harder. My empire, my pride, my entire world of control would have to bend. I could no longer operate solely from wealth and influence. And I would have to confront the parts of myself that had allowed me to mock, to belittle, to assume dominance over someone so worthy. That day I left her with the keys, but I also left with something far heavier: responsibility. For the first time, I understood that some lessons could not be bought. Some truths could not be ignored. And some people could change the way a man sees himself forever. The moment I handed the keys to Amina, I believed the lesson was over. I thought the confrontation, the guilt, and the reckoning had been addressed. I was wrong. The following days were unlike any I had experienced. For a man accustomed to control, the sense of uncertainty that came from doing something simply because it was right, without financial incentive or strategic advantage, was unnerving. Every corner of my office, every meeting, every glance at the city below reminded me that my wealth had boundaries when faced with morality. James noticed the change immediately. "Sir," he said one afternoon as I sat staring blankly out the window of my Riverside office, "you've been different since that day. You're quieter. You're reflective." "I'm thinking," I muttered, not meeting his eyes. "About everything." He nodded. "I can see that." I rubbed my temples. The fact that a loyal employee could read my inner turmoil so easily only added to my discomfort. I had always been the master of appearances, of projecting dominance. Now, no projection could hide the reality that I had been humbled. And it wasn't just internal. News traveled fast in Nairobi, and though I had requested discretion, the parking lot incident could not remain contained. Whispers circulated among my acquaintances. People began noticing subtle changes in me. Some thought it was stress, others assumed a new business challenge. None of them suspected the truth. A single mother and her child had shown me a mirror. That morning I received a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was careful, measured, almost nervous. "Mr. Muture? This is Amina and George." My pulse quickened. I had not expected her to call. "Good morning, Amina," I said cautiously. "I wanted to let you know," she began, "that I have started using the car. My son is happier and safe." "Thank you." The simplicity of her words struck me. No dramatics, no gratitude overblown, no flattery. Just honesty. "You're welcome," I replied softly, unsure how to continue. There was a pause. Then she said, "I also wanted to ask, you're different. I don't know why, but I can feel it. I hope it's not just for me." Her insight, so calm and unassuming, hit me harder than any boardroom confrontation. I swallowed. "It's not just for you." We spoke briefly about her day, her son, the neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, nothing personal beyond necessity. Yet every word felt important, heavy with meaning. For the first time in my life, conversation with someone outside my wealth felt human, real, honest. After hanging up, I realized that something had shifted irrevocably. My arrogance, my reliance on fear and power, my assumptions about people's worth, they were all in question. And I liked it. Not in a comfortable sense. In a painful, urgent, necessary sense. 2 days later, James approached me in the parking lot of my office building. "Sir," he said, hesitant, "there's something you need to see." I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." He gestured toward the street. A crowd had gathered around a small commotion. Vendors were whispering, children pointed and laughed softly. And there, at the edge of the lot, was Amina with her son, helping another mother with a broken bicycle. She smiled gently, offered advice, and even guided the boy through the steps of fixing a simple chain. I felt a pang in my chest. The humility, the care, the quiet dignity, it was all there. And I had been the one to almost humiliate her. James watched me closely. "See, sir? That woman, she inspires people. Not with wealth, not with threats, not with power. She's calm, strong, and kind. She teaches by example." I swallowed hard. "I know. You need to remember that," he said softly. "It's easy to forget when you're surrounded by privilege. But that is strength." He was right. I had spent decades cultivating influence, commanding respect, and demanding obedience. And yet, here was someone with nothing but integrity showing me what true power looked like. By the end of the week, I could no longer resist the urge to check on her. I told James to drive me to her neighborhood, quietly, without fanfare. I wanted to see her, not to lecture, not to assert dominance, but simply to understand. We arrived at a small street lined with shops and homes. Children played in the dust, women carried baskets of fruit, men fixed bikes and mended shoes. Life moved at a different pace here, unglamorous, yet vibrant, alive. I spotted Amina immediately, the same calm composure, the same gentle authority. She had just returned the shopping bag to her small home and was helping her son with homework outside, teaching him the letters he had struggled with. I cleared my throat softly. She looked up. "Mr. Muture." Her tone was neutral, not warm, not cold, just measured. I wanted to check on you," I said. "To see how the car is treating you and your son." She studied me for a long moment. "It is reliable," she said. "We are managing. And thank you for keeping your word." Her gaze softened slightly, but she remained composed. I also wanted to apologize again," I said, my voice low, hesitant. "For everything before. My words, my arrogance, the way I tried to dismiss you. That was wrong. Completely wrong." Her son looked up at me, curious. "Mum, he's saying sorry?" "Yes," she said gently. "He is learning humility." The boy's eyes sparkled. "Good. You must learn, sir." I laughed softly, genuinely. It was a first, a release I hadn't anticipated. The simplicity of the child's remark pierced through layers of ego, wealth, and pride. "I am learning," I said. And for the first time, I meant it. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about her constantly. Not in the way one thinks about an object to be acquired, a business opportunity, or a rival to be outmaneuvered. I thought about her humanity, her quiet resilience, her unwavering integrity. It was unsettling. A part of me resisted. After all, my life had always been about control, about power, about certainty. Yet another part, a deeper part, recognized the truth. I had underestimated her. I had been humbled, and that humility demanded change. I started small. I instructed my team to organize a maintenance schedule for her car. I asked James to discreetly ensure she had access to any spare parts, repairs, or services she needed, without intrusion. I never told her. I didn't need to. The act itself mattered more than recognition. And slowly I began to realize the truth. Power is not proven by wealth or fear, but by integrity and accountability. Amina had taught me that lesson silently, calmly, with a strength I could not ignore. And it was only the beginning. The city felt different that morning. Nairobi, with its chaotic rhythm and relentless energy, usually fueled my confidence, my dominance, my unshakable sense that I could bend life to my will. But now, each honking horn, each shouting vendor, each child darting across the street felt like a subtle reminder that control was an illusion, and humility was a force far more powerful than I had ever acknowledged. James arrived early, knocking softly before entering my office. "Sir, a word." I nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "It's about the parking lot incident," he began cautiously. "Some of your colleagues are talking. The story, well, it's spreading quietly. They're saying you were humbled by a single mother." I bristled. "Quietly? What does that even mean?" "It means people are whispering," he said. "Some admire that you kept your word, others are mocking. There's even talk online." Online. The word made my chest tighten. My reputation, built painstakingly over decades, seemed fragile suddenly. The people I had assumed feared me might now question me. "And?" I asked, voice sharper than intended. "And," James continued, "you might want to be careful about your next moves. How you respond will shape how they see you, and, more importantly, how you see yourself." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He was right, of course. But that didn't make it any easier. Later that morning, I decided to leave the office early. I needed to see her again, not for apologies, not for validation, not for the car, but to witness her life, to understand the strength that had so thoroughly unsettled me. The drive to her neighborhood was quiet. I barely spoke to James, my mind occupied with what I would say, how I would act, how I could ensure I did not repeat the arrogance of before. When we arrived, I saw her immediately. Amina and George was outside, teaching her son to read. His small fingers traced the letters of a worn notebook as she guided him patiently, correcting gently where he faltered. She looked up, noticed me, and froze, just for a moment. Then she nodded politely. "Sir," she said, voice measured, neutral. "Good afternoon, Amina," I said softly. Her son glanced at me curiously. "Mum, he's here again." "Yes," she said gently, still maintaining that calm authority that had undone me once before. "I wanted to check on you, and your son," I began, lowering my eyes. "To make sure, everything is okay." She studied me for a long moment. "Everything is fine," she said. "We are managing." I nodded, swallowing. "I also wanted to say that I am aware of how I behaved. I was wrong, in the parking lot, in my words, in my attitude. And I want to ensure that never happens again." Her gaze softened slightly. "Acknowledgement is a good start," she said quietly. The words cut through me. Acknowledgement. Not forgiveness. Not gratitude. Not flattery. Just acknowledgement. And it was enough to make me reflect on all the arrogance, all the dismissals, all the moments I had used wealth and fear as shields to avoid accountability. "Would it be acceptable if I helped in some practical way?" I asked cautiously. "Not because I am rich or because I must, but because I want to support your life, your son, your dignity." She blinked, measured me carefully, and said, "Help can be useful. But it must respect our independence." "Yes," I said immediately. "I understand. Respect first." We stood in silence for a moment. The air was heavy with heat and dust, children's laughter echoing faintly from the street. Vendors shouted prices for fruit and bread. Life moved, indifferent to me, indifferent to wealth, indifferent to power. And yet I felt a strange sense of relief. Seeing her calm, measured, unwavering, I realized that my wealth, my influence, my reputation, all of it, was irrelevant here. Real power belonged to those who acted with integrity, who honored promises, who remained steadfast in humility. The following day, James came to me with a report. "Sir," he said, "Amina has received the keys. The car is in use. The neighborhood respects her. And they talk about you." I raised an eyebrow. They talk about me? Yes, sir. Not all positively. Some mock the billionaire humbled by a single mother. But many admire that you kept your word even if it was delayed. Some even say it shows character. Character. The word felt unfamiliar. Almost alien in my world of contracts, boardrooms, and negotiations. I sat back in my chair. Character. Accountability. Integrity. Words that mattered more than any sum of money, any title, any accolade. James, I said quietly, thank you for staying honest with me. He nodded. It's my job, sir. But also, it's my duty as someone who believes in you. I exhaled, feeling the weight of truth pressing down on me. The billionaire who had once believed himself untouchable was no longer certain of anything except one fact. Amina and George had changed him. A week later I decided to act. Not with fanfare. Not with announcements. But quietly, deliberately, humbly. I instructed James to arrange for repairs on her old Probox. Not the new car, not a luxury replacement, but the vehicle she had been using before, patched and reliable for her daily commute. I wanted her to have choices, not charity. James raised an eyebrow. Sir, that is thoughtful. But she might still refuse. Let her refuse, I said. This is not for me. This is for her. We drove to her neighborhood, parked a discreet distance away, and watched as she returned from the small market. She noticed the Probox first. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened as she read the situation. I appreciate this, she said softly. But I cannot accept it unless it respects our independence. It does, I said quietly. It is a choice. You may accept, you may refuse. Either way, I will have done what I promised and acted responsibly. She nodded slowly, glanced at her son, and then smiled faintly. Then, thank you. Her son clapped his hands quietly. Yes. Now we have 2 cars, Mum. I laughed softly, genuinely. For the first time in years, I laughed not because of money, influence, or control, but because of a small human victory. By the end of the week, I noticed a subtle transformation within myself. My arrogance had begun to crumble, replaced by a cautious humility. I approached business meetings differently, listened more, assumed less. Even my staff noticed the change. James smiled privately when he saw me. Sir, you're different. Calmer. More patient. And you admit mistakes. I nodded. I have to, James. I cannot go back. I will not go back. I am accountable now. And the truth settled deep within me. Humility was not weakness. Respect was not vulnerability. And integrity was the strongest currency in the world. Amina and George had taught me all this. Quietly, firmly, with dignity. And every day I was reminded that the choices I had made, the arrogance I had displayed, and the humility I was now cultivating would define the man I was becoming. Long after the car had changed hands, long after the whispers had faded, long after the city had moved on. For the first time, I understood that wealth was meaningless without conscience, and power was hollow without respect. And I was beginning to see that the true test of a man was not in contracts or deals, but in his ability to honor his word and uphold his humanity. The weeks that followed my reconciliation with Amina passed in a strange rhythm. Nairobi, relentless as always, moved on, but I could not. Every meeting, every decision, every conversation reminded me that the arrogance I once took for granted was no longer an option. It was during one of these reflective mornings that I received a call that unsettled me more than anything Amina or her son could have. Sir, James said cautiously, there's a situation at the corporate branch in Westlands. One of your senior executives has been mishandling funds. It's serious. I frowned. How serious? Potentially millions, sir. And it could go public if not handled immediately. I clenched my jaw. For years, my life had been a series of controlled crises. I had always been the man with answers, the one whose authority ensured that nothing spiraled out of hand. But this was different. It wasn't just about money, it was about trust, responsibility, and the integrity of my empire. I instructed James to drive me to the branch immediately. The streets of Nairobi blurred past, the familiar chaos of Matatus, boda-bodas, and street vendors, yet I felt detached, focused entirely on the unfolding crisis. At the branch, I was met by my operations manager and the finance director. Papers, files, spreadsheets, they all screamed one thing: betrayal. Sir, the finance director said, voice tight, the executive in question is trying to cover it up. Internal audits have flagged discrepancies, but they're claiming miscommunication. I exhaled slowly. And this could go public? Yes, sir. within 24 hours if we don't act. I walked to the office window, watching the streets of Nairobi below. Vendors shouted prices, children ran through dust and sunlight, traffic crawled past. Life went on. And here I was, faced with a choice that tested my judgment, my humility, and my leadership. For decades, my instinct would have been simple. Punish, dismiss, assert authority, make an example. Fear as a lesson. Money as a deterrent. Reputation as a shield. But I hesitated. I thought of Amina. Her calm dignity. Her insistence on respect. The lessons she had forced me to learn. And suddenly the old way felt hollow. "James," I said quietly, "bring me the records. I need to understand everything before making a decision." Hours passed. I reviewed accounts, cross-checked statements, questioned staff, and dug into the situation with painstaking detail. Every instinct told me to act swiftly, decisively, ruthlessly. But another voice, the one Amina had awakened within me, urged patience, understanding, fairness. Finally, I called the executive into my office. The man was younger, confident, sharp, a rising star in my company. And yet, under my gaze he faltered. "Sir," he began, "I can explain." "You will," I said, voice calm but firm. "I want the full truth. No excuses. No hiding. And I want it now." He swallowed, hesitated, then launched into a careful narrative. Mistakes, oversight, pressure, fear of failure. He laid bare his errors, his insecurities, his rationalizations. I listened. Every word. Every pause. Every falter. When he finished, I leaned back in my chair. "You made mistakes," I said. "Yes. But what matters now is how you respond. You will correct these errors, restore trust, and learn accountability. Not punishment, not fear, accountability." He blinked, surprised. "Sir, you're not what?" I asked. "Not angry. Not dismissive. Not like you used to be." I nodded slowly. "I've changed. And if this company is to endure, everyone in it must learn the value of responsibility, integrity, and humility." He left, visibly shaken but respectful. I turned to James. "Do you see? This is the difference between fear and respect. Authority and integrity. Arrogance and humility." James nodded. "Yes, sir. And you are living it." That evening I returned home, exhausted but contemplative. My mansion, my cars, my empire, all of it felt less important than the lessons I had begun to internalize. I sat in my study, gazing out at the Nairobi skyline, thinking about Amina and her son, thinking about the executive I had just confronted, thinking about the man I had been, and the man I was becoming. The phone rang. It was Amina. "Sir," she said, voice calm, measured, "I wanted to thank you. I heard about the situation at your company. The way you handled it. I am impressed. Not by authority, not by power, but by fairness. By honesty. By humility." I swallowed, touched by the unexpected acknowledgement. "Thank you, Amina. It means a lot, coming from you." She paused. "I think you are changing. I hope it lasts." "I intend for it to," I said firmly. Her voice softened. "Good. Then I will continue to trust you, not because you are wealthy, but because you are human, and because you are trying to be better." The line went dead, leaving me in quiet reflection. I realized then that humility was not a one-time event. It was a constant challenge, a deliberate choice, a daily practice. And loyalty, to family, to employees, to promises, to principles, was its companion. The next morning I walked through my offices with renewed purpose. Meetings were conducted differently. Decisions were measured, considerate. Staff noticed the change, and for the first time I felt genuine respect, not fear, radiating through the company. And I knew that Amina's lessons had created ripples far beyond our personal interactions. They had begun to influence the way I lived, the way I worked, the way I led. That evening I returned to her neighborhood, not to interfere, not to impress, but simply to see the lives I had touched, the dignity I had restored. She was outside, playing quietly with her son. They waved when they saw me. I waved back, smiling genuinely. No words were necessary. The respect, the trust, the understanding, it was all there, unspoken, palpable. I turned to leave, heart full. I understood now that true power did not reside in wealth, dominance, or fear. It resided in integrity, in humility, in the ability to honor one's word and uphold dignity, both one's own and that of others. And I knew, finally, that I could never return to the arrogance I had once taken for granted. Because some lessons once learned never leave. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of my office, but I barely noticed it. My mind was elsewhere, tangled in a new kind of unrest. 4 years, the only things that demanded my attention were contracts, acquisitions, and the relentless pursuit of wealth. Now, a far more delicate matter weighed on me: family. Not my own, not in the biological sense, but the family of my employees, the city, and most profoundly, Amina and her son. For the first time, I understood that power extended beyond balance sheets and office hierarchies. It encompassed human lives, their dignity, their struggles, and their dreams. James arrived, quiet as always, but attentive. "Sir, you requested an early meeting," he said softly. "Yes," I replied. "I need updates on Amina and her son. How are they faring? The car? School? Daily life?" James hesitated, measuring his words. "Sir, they're doing well. But there's been a small issue at her son's school. The tuition for next term has been delayed, and the administration is pressing for payment." I exhaled. A simple, solvable problem. And yet, the weight it carried was far greater than any financial transaction I had managed in my life. This was about dignity, about trust, about ensuring that my past arrogance did not impede their future. "Let's handle it quietly," I said firmly. "No announcements. No charity. Just support that respects their independence." James nodded, approving. "Understood, sir." By midday we were at Amina's neighborhood. I parked discreetly, and she emerged from her small home, her son at her side. She noticed me immediately, her expression calm, careful, yet welcoming enough to show she trusted me would not impose. "Mr. Muture," she said softly. "Good afternoon, Amina," I replied. "I wanted to ensure the school situation is resolved without causing you distress." Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise. "Sir, that's thoughtful." "Not thoughtful. Necessary," I corrected. "You should never have to choose between dignity and opportunity for your child. That is not a burden anyone should bear." She nodded, absorbing my words. "I appreciate that. Truly." Her son, curious as ever, glanced at me. "Sir, you keep helping but you never ask for thanks. Why?" I looked at him genuinely, thoughtfully. "Because some things aren't about thanks. They're about doing what is right." He grinned. "Then I like you, sir." I laughed softly, a rare, genuine sound that surprised even me. "And I like you too, young man." After leaving her neighborhood, I returned to the office, yet my thoughts stayed with them. I realized that empathy, true empathy, was not about grand gestures or wealth. It was about understanding another person's struggles, validating them, and offering support without undermining independence. For years I had thought I was empathetic. I had written checks, sponsored events, hosted dinners. But that had been performance, not understanding. Amina and her son had shown me what real empathy looked like: quiet, measured, principled, and deeply human. That evening my phone rang. It was my mother, a woman of quiet authority and sharp insight. "Baraka," she said, voice calm but firm. "I've been watching you. The news, your dealings, this change. Tell me, is it real?" I swallowed, unsure how to convey the depths of what had occurred. "Mother, I was arrogant, blind, and harsh. But I've begun to see, truly see. Wealth, power, status, they are meaningless without dignity, empathy, and integrity." Her pause was long. Then she said softly, "I see it, my son. And I am proud. But remember, true change is tested not when all is calm, but when storms arrive. Do not falter now." I nodded, absorbing her words. They resonated with everything I had been learning. Change, real change, would be tested by trials, by the inevitable moments when arrogance or old habits might tempt me back. The next day a crisis arose, not corporate, not financial, but deeply personal. Amina's son fell ill, a sudden fever that left her anxious and overwhelmed. James called me quietly, informing me that she had been unable to afford the full cost of medication. Without hesitation, I instructed James to accompany me to the clinic. For the first time, I was not arriving as a man of wealth imposing assistance, but as someone willing to stand beside another human being in vulnerability. At the clinic, I met Amina's anxious gaze. She flinched slightly at my presence, unsure, wary. "I'm here," I said simply. "Not to impose, not to judge. I'm here to help." Her relief was palpable, yet she maintained composure. "Sir, thank you. But Let me do this," I interrupted gently. "You focus on your son. That's your priority." We handled the payment discreetly. No fanfare, no announcements, no recognition. Just a quiet act of support, respecting her dignity and autonomy. As her son rested, fevered but now stable, she turned to me. "Sir, I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to, I said. This is not a debt. It's responsibility. And accountability. Her eyes softened, glistening. She understood. She recognized the sincerity behind the act, the absence of arrogance, the presence of humility. And in that moment I understood fully what it meant to be human. To care without demanding gratitude. To support without asserting dominance. To act out of conscience rather than ego. On the drive back to my mansion, I reflected on everything I had learned. My empire, my wealth, my power, all of it was hollow if not tempered with integrity and empathy. The lessons from Amina and her son had reached far beyond a single promise or a car. They had reshaped my worldview. James, ever observant, said quietly, "Sir, this is the man I always hoped you could become." I glanced at him, a small smile breaking through the reflection and fatigue. "I hope to be worthy of it, James. I really do." That night, I sat alone in my study reviewing the past months. The confrontation in the parking lot, the car, the reconciliations, the corporate challenge, the school situation, the illness, it all formed a pattern. Life was testing me not with contracts or deals, but with morality, empathy, and human connection. And for the first time I felt equipped not just to pass the test but to embrace it fully. Amina had given me more than an opportunity to correct a wrong. She had given me a mirror showing me the man I could be. Not arrogant. Not cold. Not entitled. But accountable. Humble. Human. And I realized then, with a certainty that no wealth or influence could replicate, true power is measured not by domination but by compassion. True respect is earned not by fear but by honor. True legacy is built not on empires, but on lives touched with integrity. And that was the lesson that would endure far beyond cars, contracts, or corporate victories. The sun rose over Nairobi, spilling golden light across the city, painting the skyline with warmth that seemed almost symbolic. I woke that morning with a sense of purpose that was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time in my life, my ambition was no longer about dominance or wealth. It was about accountability, integrity, and the lives I could touch meaningfully. James arrived promptly, his usual quiet confidence steadying me. "Sir, shall we go?" "Yes," I said simply. "It's time." We drove to Amina's neighborhood, the streets alive with their usual chaos. Vendors shouting, children darting between cars, the smell of fresh bread and roasted maize in the air. And yet, today, every detail felt alive with possibility. I saw her first. Amina and George stood outside her small home, her son playing nearby, laughter echoing in the narrow street. She looked up, cautious yet calm, her gaze steady as always. "Good morning, sir," she said, voice neutral but not cold. "Good morning, Amina," I replied. "I hope you don't mind me coming by." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "I don't mind. It's unexpected." "Good unexpected," I added, a faint smile touching my lips. Her son ran forward. "Sir, you came." "Yes, young man," I said, kneeling slightly so I could meet his eyes. "I promised I would, and I always keep my promises." Amina watched, her composure intact, yet I sensed approval in her eyes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small keys to the car, now polished, maintained, and fully functional. "These are yours," I said softly. "Not because I am rich, not because I can buy anything, but because I promised. And because it's the right thing to do." She regarded the keys for a moment, then at me and finally smiled faintly. Not a smile of relief or flattery but of acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her son clapped his hands in delight. "Yes, finally. We can go to school safely every day." I chuckled, feeling a warmth in my chest that no boardroom victory had ever given me. The boy's joy was genuine, untainted by materialism or ambition. It was simple, honest, and profoundly moving. We spent the morning together talking quietly about school, about life, about the small challenges that shape everyday existence. I listened more than I spoke, absorbing the depth of their resilience, their dignity, and their quiet strength. At one point I asked her, "Amina, have you ever doubted me?" Her eyes met mine, unwavering. "I doubted what you were capable of when arrogance ruled your actions. But you've proven that a man can change. That humility can exist alongside power." I nodded, humbled. The truth of her words settled deep within me. For decades I had believed that wealth, fear, and influence defined a man. But she had shown me otherwise. Her son tugged at my hand. "Sir, can we go for a drive?" I laughed softly. "Of course, young man." As we drove through the streets of Nairobi, the city seemed different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I noticed the laughter of children, the kindness of strangers, the resilience of everyday people. The wealth, the cars, the office buildings, all of it existed, but it no longer defined me. For the first time, I felt what it meant to live with integrity, to act with conscience, and to wield influence with responsibility rather than arrogance. After returning, we sat outside her home, the boy playing quietly nearby. I turned to Amina, voice steady. "I want to apologize again," I said. "Not for the car this time, but for everything before. My arrogance, my dismissal, my pride. I hope you can forgive me." She looked at me, measured, calm. "Baraka, I see you now. Not the man I first met, but someone capable of humility, responsibility, and honor. I forgive, not because you deserve it, but because you have shown the courage to change." Her words struck me with a force that no punishment, no reprimand, no lesson could ever match. Forgiveness given freely, without obligation or flattery, it was powerful beyond measure. Her son leaned against her, smiling up at both of us. "Mum, he's really changed." "Yes, my son," she said softly, "and that is the truest lesson." I realized then that transformation was not about grand gestures or displays of wealth. It was about consistency, integrity, and the courage to act rightly, even when it was difficult. The weeks that followed solidified my change. At work, I approached decisions with thoughtfulness and fairness. Employees noticed the difference, responding with genuine respect rather than fear. James, ever observant, commented quietly one afternoon, "Sir, you're no longer just a leader. You're a man people can trust." And I knew he was right. Trust, I realized, was the currency that mattered most. It was more valuable than contracts, more durable than wealth, more enduring than influence. I continued to support Amina and her son, not as a patron, but as a man committed to responsibility. Whether through small gestures, quiet assistance, or simply being present when needed, I ensured that my actions reflected respect for their dignity and independence. One evening, I visited her home unannounced, simply to share tea and conversation. We talked about life, dreams, hopes, and struggles. I realized that true connection, empathy, compassion, and honesty was more fulfilling than any boardroom negotiation or business triumph. Her son smiled up at me, shyly offering a small drawing he had made. "For you, sir," he said. I accepted it with genuine gratitude, understanding that these moments, small, simple, sincere, were the true treasures of life. Months passed and Nairobi moved on. But I had changed irrevocably. My arrogance had been replaced with humility, my detachment with empathy, my obsession with control with a respect for humanity. One afternoon, as I stood on the balcony of my office overlooking the city, James approached quietly. "Sir, you've become someone very different from the man I first met," he said. I smiled faintly, looking out at the bustling streets. "Yes, James, I am different, and I intend to remain so." He nodded. "Amina, she changed you, didn't she?" "Yes," I admitted. "Not just her, but her son. The lessons they embody, courage, dignity, empathy, they are things I will carry always." James smiled, approving. "Good. Because true power, sir, true respect, comes from that." And I knew he was right. That night I returned to my mansion, but it felt less like a fortress and more like a home. I reflected on the journey, from arrogance and coldness to humility and accountability. From mockery to understanding, from dominance to empathy. I thought of Amina and her son, of the lessons they had given me, of the humanity I had rediscovered. And I realized with clarity and certainty that wealth, influence, and status were meaningless if divorced from conscience and integrity. I had been humbled, challenged, and transformed. And in the quiet of the Nairobi night, I understood the truth that would guide me for the rest of my life. A man is not measured by his wealth, but by his words, his actions, and his capacity to honor his promises. A man is not defined by arrogance, but by humility. And a life of meaning is built not on dominance, but on respect, empathy, and love for humanity. I had learned this lesson from a single mother and her son, and it was the most valuable lesson I would ever receive. And I would carry it forward, not for recognition, not for reputation, but because it was right. Because finally I had become the man I was meant to be.